The Long Way Home, Chapter 14. A Crew. Friends. Something like that. Vincent had had time to think over a few things over the 2 weeks in the hyperspace sea. At the front of his mind, of course, was trying to formulate a plan to seize a more complete set of navigation charts with which they might more effectively find their way home. Home. Words like home brought up the more intrusive line of thought constantly running at the back of his mind to the fore. As a proud sci-fi of New Montreal, he'd of course never admitted, but the story of the Shadow and Gideon was one of his favorite tales of heroism and resilience. Peter the Shadow George had gone out of his way to rescue a maimed Exarch slave boy who'd been left for dead, despite the fact that, given the chance, the boy would have probably killed him in pure terror. He used vital medical supplies to ensure the boy's legs would heal properly and gave the boy a name, Gideon. Gave the boy a father, a family. Despite how often the story surfaced in his mind, he couldn't quite see why the George boy would tell him to think it over to figure out why he'd left the Mr. Rest. Of course, thinking over the Shadow and Gideon evoked the martyrdom of St. Aidan Purefoy. The Shadow had cast down the altar to a false god on which he'd been martyred and laid the sainted martyr in the victorious repose. It was, admittedly, one of the more popular stories amongst the Catholics in the coalition. Some people even went so far as to declare the Shadow an honorary CIPer. There were even a couple of movies about both events. St. Aidan Purefoy was patron of endurance and courage in the face of the insurmountable, though, and his victory over death shows that even the insurmountable could be conquered by faithful courage. So said his Sunday school teacher. In addition to such cheerful thoughts, Vincent was interrogated by a cadet every couple of days on one subject or another, from what the difference between a Republican CIP was if they're both Terran, to how to know whether you have a good idea and should tell somebody, to whether he has any more recent movies saved somewhere, and why was he so old. Vincent bore these interrogations with as good a grace as he could manage, and the kid's blunt nature seemed to complement Vincent's gruff fumbling. On the other hand, Cadet was proving to be a natural pilot. Vincent knew the dangers of letting the kid know that, so he just quietly dialed up the difficulty of the sims and pointed out where his strengths were and what mistakes he repeated. The George boy said his cousin was doing pretty good in her sims, and Vincent agreed from those scores, but she had less raw talent than Cadet. Ironically, neither one of them were good enough to replace the George boy in the co-pilot's chair when the chips were down, but at least they were good enough to set up a sensible watch. Better, they were both improving by the day. The past 14 days had been heartening for Jason. For one thing, the answer to the wholesome riddle he'd laid at Vincent's feet had obviously eluded him, and still did. For another, Cadet was spending an increasing amount of time one-on-one with Vincent in the bridge and had a natural talent at the yoke. Jason harbored a private hope that Cadet could take his place in the co-pilot's chair before the journey's end. Yet another thing to be heartened by was Trandre's diligent practice at the Sims to demonstrate that he and Vincent were right to rely on her to take watch at the bridge. Better, she and Cadet had begun to build a tentative rapport in which he'd ask questions or make comments when Trandre had let the silence grow too long, and she'd answer him with her customary ease. Two friends outside the family made on her own, and Jason felt the soothing warmth of pride in another quiet his constant companions. Best of all was that Vincent had begun to cut back significantly on his drinking, or maybe it would be better to say that he had continued to cut back on his drinking. Best of all, from what they could piece together from both the tablet and the recorded data, their destination would be habitable light world for them to explore. A chance for everyone to shake off cabin fever would do them all good. He did manage to catch Vi on her own in the weight room to discuss something somewhat delicate one day, though. Thank God for different gravity needs. Vi, I wanted to talk to you about the fight a little, if that's okay, Jason began.
I'm sorry, I wasn't more...
Nothing like that, Jason interrupted before the ugly thought could get its way into the world. You did exactly what I asked you to do and kept yourself safe. That was more than enough, okay?
Okay, if you say so, sir.
Jason ostensibly rolled his eyes at her, sir, before he went on. I wanted to know, did you happen to hear what I said during the fight?
There was a lot of swearing.
You confirmed? Jason swallowed his nose and asked, so when you meet my Nana, can you please just not mention what I said? She flicked her ears towards him and slapped her tail on the deck as she stared slack-jawed at Jason for a long moment in silence. What?
You stood up to those awful birds, but your Nana scares the crap out of you, she asked,
clearly nonplussed. Well, aye. Some birds are way easier to face down than my Nana. Besides, I don't want my mouth washed out. Vi laughed at him, and Jason had to step forward to catch the barbells as they slipped out of her fingers.
He tried to take the laughter with good grace, but she said, I'm sorry, but you have to admit it's funny. Jason tried his best to not take offense. I don't suppose I have to admit to anything. Maybe you're just crazy and have no idea what's funny. It's just, I said, quieting her mirth and turning melancholy. You say that like you're sure we're going to get home. Aye, we are, Jason said, as he flashed her his most confident smile. I already promised. As heartfelt as he was by that, Jason did keep a careful eye on her when they were in the common areas of the ship, and he asked Tundre to lend an ear to her if she wanted to talk in their private cabin. According to Tundre, Vi was missing her home terribly, despite keeping up a cheerful front. Jason would have to think on something to do to help her feel better. By the end of the journey, Vincent was eager to stretch his legs as the rest of the crew. When did he start thinking of them as crew, let alone as his? He couldn't pin it down. In any case, he decided that a little caution on a day's delay while the long way gathered data on the planet from orbit, it wasn't likely that the ship's computers could identify dangerous fauna from orbit, but other hazards like seismic activity, frequent storm areas, or volcanoes could be easily picked out. Besides, it was never a bad idea to take as good of a look at one's options as possible. Haste makes waste, after all. I agree, the George boy said when Vincent broached the plan with him. Thanks to our last couple of trips, we haven't even dipped into the canned food yet. If we can take down another game animal or maybe catch a couple of fish again, that'd be good for variety. So the more we know about our landing options, the better. Besides, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. All right, kid. What's on your mind? Vincent asked, recognizing the slow cadence and thoughtful light behind the George kid's glance. Homesickness. Homesickness and what to do about it. I'm a bit stumped. The George kid sighed ruefully. Missing home? Vincent asked, trying and probably failing to make his voice gentle. Aye, big time. I can regulate, though. And upon catching Vincent's look, the kid quickly explained. I've got Tran along, then the Long Way is a good ship, so I can regulate well enough. Plus, I made some friends aboard. That's all helps. And this isn't the first time I've been away from among the star tides we sing. This might be the furthest I've been out, though, and might be the longest time, but I figure I'll be okay. Tran, too. Probably. Cadet's never really had a home, so belonging is new to him. I'm worried about Vi. Vincent did a poor job at hiding a grin as he said, It's so surprising that you're worrying yourself sick over someone else again. Shut up, the kid retorted half-heartedly. I know I ought to do something to make her feel better. Or somebody ought to. I'm just stumped on what to do about it. To start with, Vincent grumbled, try and remember that you're just as much of a normal kid as the other three. You're allowed to be imperfect. The kid let out a rueful groan and replied, Aye, that's true. But I still feel like I ought to help somehow. Well, Vincent mused, we have a Dane system with nobody else around, and nobody got any duties pressing. There is that business of your hunting idea, Jason interrupted. It's not pressing. We're going to have to be very careful about that. I think it'd be nice to just relax while the Long Way does a thing. Maybe we can watch some movies together or something. How will that? Vi will keep on missing her home, keep on wanting to see her mom and dad and siblings if she has them, just like you. However, if we spend a little time to enjoy her company, just have a little fun with her that isn't part of running the ship, it'll make her feel appreciated. Trust me, kid. I wasn't always a loner. If you say so, the kid said somberly. Hey, Vincent said as he reached over to jostle the kid's shoulder. You can't fix everything for them. It's okay. Aye, you're right. I know you're right. I'm going to go work on above sweat in the treadmill. Holler if you need me. Will do, kid, Vincent said, and waited for him to pant down to the weight room before he broke the good news to the other three. Tundre was unbothered by another day aboard. Vi politely asked if they could try and land near a body of water, and Cadet grumbled under his breath about needing to have a proper flight. Their opinion of having a movie night was universally approved, though, and so after Vi had scrounged up the last of the packaged salty snack foods, the four of them settled down on the sofa to go through the menus. Isn't Jason going to join us? Vi asked as Vincent scrolled past some titles that got no reactions from the young companions. Yeah, he assured her evenly. He must be feeling well. He wanted to work up a sweat. I guess he's excited for tomorrow, too. Oh, I said before spotting a title. What about that one? This one? Vincent asked, scrolling back up to highlight the title he thought she was pointing at. Yeah, she confirmed. Cast Down by the Shadow sounds kind of interesting. Oh, this will be funny, Tundre murmured with a knowing grin playing subtly across her face. You know what? Why not? Vincent said as he selected the title. The George kid returned from post-workout shower, just as the based on historical events in white against black background came up on the screen. He looked at Vincent, he looked at Tundre, and adopted an exaggerated slump in his posture as he said, The things I put up with. Fine. We'll watch this one. Just remember that almost all of it is, whatever. Lighten up, Jason, Trondre nearly sang smugly. It's a good movie. Jason settled in between Vincent and his cousin and tried mightily to maintain a grumpy visage as the film began. Trondre had been right. It was funny. The movie itself wasn't funny. In fact, it was rather thrilling, so long as one didn't take historical inaccuracy too seriously and made some allowances for artistic liberty, such as the main antagonist and the Shadow having met and spoken with each other before the climactic final battle. What was funny was how often the George boy groaned, sputtered, barked with incredulous laughter, and muttered corrections under his breath. Now that was amusing. Once the credits began to roll, the George kid snatched the remote and declared, "I'm picking the next movie." Vincent was in a thoroughly good mood, so he let it ride. But when he saw the title that the boy typed in, he raised a quizzical brow and asked, "The Ride of the Warp Speed Battle Wagon?" "Aye," he answered. "Oh, you have it. Surprised you know about that one," Vincent admitted. "Of course I know about her. She was at the tip of Nelson's drill, right alongside Robin Williams, and what's more, even though, wait, no spoilers." "If you don't know already, I won't ruin the scene for you," the George boy reiterated. "Just watch the movie. It's good, I promise." One gritty and realistic depiction of the first CIPers to fight in the Exarch Dominion War later, and the kids were animatedly chatting about Captain Lena Chen, her beloved Marcus, and the rest of the crew of the heroic Warp Speed Battle Wagon. Vincent privately admitted that it did his pride more than a little good to see 3 Republican kids speaking so well of his national heroes. Obviously, he'd never admit to such a thing aloud, just like any CIPer forced to make such ambitions. He did, however, say, "Surprised you guys learned about Captain Lena Chen." The George kid sat in pensive silence, and none of the other kids tried to fill the gap until he said, "A lot of people in the Republic, mostly civvies, like to talk big about the special relationship between the Star Sailors and the Republic. It's true that nobody else affords us," the boy's eyebrows furrowed in focus for a moment as he muttered, "I've never realized how hard it is to explain," under his breath. He sat silent for a beat before continuing hesitantly. I mean, the Star Sailors, basically equal protections and rights within their borders besides the Republic. Sure, I know that in the Coalition, it can be hard to get things organized, but the crew of the Warp Speed Battle Wagon charged in on their own when the Republic was still mobilizing, and the Star Sailors were calling the splitting of the fleets. They charged in. They charged in because they were Terrans, and a ship special to all Terrans was attacked and murdered. They fought for honor, for vengeance, for the Star Sailors, for us. Honor is honor, wherever you find it. Good enough, Vincent mused, and fell into silence as another movie was chosen. And so it went as the night dragged on, and the kids got more and more tired. The commentary and questions slowly dwindled until Vincent sat beside 3 slumbering children, while the George kid wobbled and tried to keep his eyes propped open. Vincent began cradling Vi in his arms and carrying her to the bedroom she shared with Trondre. He tried to ignore the tightness in his chest that accompanying the sharp pang as he remembered warmth and his loss as he tucked her in and stepped into the galley to repeat the process. The George boy was swaying in the dancing lights cast by the still-playing film. Vincent thought the kid tried to mumble and offer to help as he scooped the limply slumbering form of Trondre up in his arms. Once again, he tried to ignore the swelling ache in his heart as he tucked the sleeping girl into the top bunk. He would feign outwardly that it wasn't there. When he returned, the George boy was slumped over on the sofa, his struggle against slumber finally lost. Vincent sighed and made up the kid's bed for him. 23 long years since the last time he tucked his cull in. 23 long years of his hopeless search and insatiable mission of vengeance. Vincent's stone heart had cracks in it. Jason was deceptively heavy in Vincent's aging arms. It seemed to Vincent that the weight of ages of duty pressed down on the boy's fragile form as he carried him to his bed and tucked him in. "You're still a normal kid," he said to the George boy softly. "Don't try and hold more than you can carry." The movie night had helped the kids, but Vincent needed a drink. Just one, to take the edge off the cracks in his heart. He took a glass with him. He meant what he'd said about putting back. One drink, and he'd sip at it like he used to. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.